Today we'll change it up a little bit. We're going to talk about how to persevere in this pandemic. You read the news in the morning if you get it done later in the day sometime, and it hits you. Flattening the curve won't lead to coronavirus turning point, study finds. Evidence of first death weeks earlier than previously reported alters the U.S. timeline. Coronavirus attacks lining of blood vessels all over the body, Swiss study finds. Coronavirus's ability to mutate has been vastly underestimated, and mutations affect deadliness of strains, Chinese studies find. All bad news, basically, right? Is there any good news? That's a good question. I think the idea is we know more clearly now than we did before. What we know may not be what we wanted to know, but we're getting more information about the coronavirus. Is it important to keep up? Well, I think none of us are in a position that we're making policies, so in that sense, no. But for the individual, I think it's definitely important. It's a way to keep yourself from being caught up in the hype, false information, fake news, shall we say. Like masks, I've talked about before. I also have written some stuff on my Medium page. I'll put a link down there talking about coronavirus. But there's a lot of information that would have been useful to know earlier. And if you kept up, you looked at reasonable sources, used your brain, you could have figured things out. Like, you probably should have been wearing a mask already months ago in the US, even though the WHO, the CDC weren't recommending. They are recommending now. They should have recommended months ago, I feel. If you look at Asia, they've already used it for a while. It's probably good to know how this is transmitted. Is it only by droplet? Is it aerosolized? How much distance is good distance? Is 6 feet that much different from 3 feet? How can you catch this thing? Is there anything you could do about it to protect yourself? How infectious is it? These are all things good to know. There's practical reasons and for, I would say, mental and emotional reasons. I feel knowledge is the greatest enemy of fear. Once you know more, you can know more exactly what you're afraid of, what you could do about it, what you cannot do about it. And hopefully you wouldn't try stupid things like drinking chloroquine that's meant for the fishes. I don't think you could be an ostrich. I think many countries have tried that, just pretending this thing will go away. It hasn't gone away. It's not going to go away. We're realizing that it's going to be a while. We're going to live with this thing for months, if not years. And it seems like it's still going to be at least as deadly as it has been for quite a while longer. If this study is correct, maybe it'll be more deadly. Who knows? Because, numbers are hard to say, right? But maybe it's killing more people in the US than it was in China. I don't know. We also have different strategies. But I think the main question is, what do we do? So in the last talk, I spoke about planning when we cannot plan. And today, I'll tell you another lesson I learned from the third world, shall we say. So before we do that, let's take a look at Elliot Kip Joel. If you haven't heard of him, He's the #1 marathon runner. He recently ran a marathon in less than 2 hours, which is amazing if you think about how long a marathon is. It's over 26 miles. 2 hours, 120 minutes, right? 120 minutes, say 26 miles. 5 minutes for every mile is 130 minutes. You run a 4-minute something mile for 26 miles. Most of us can't even run a 4-minute mile for 1 mile, half a mile. No, we can't do that. So it talks about him and his coach, DrSean, right? And, he started running when he was little. It talks about his life story and how, even though he's won so many things, right? He doesn't have a big head. He still lives in his place. He's training, right? He just pretends he's a normal person. I guess he happens to have his own sort of room when other people share a room. He's very diligent. He works very hard at training. And so actually they comment that, he hasn't gotten injured since the 2012 incident. So how? Isn't marathoning really hard? It is. He's going to be 36. But he's still going to go to the Tokyo Olympics next year. He's dedicated. He made it. But he has continued to make it. See, there's a lesson here to be said. They talked about a crumpled up picture. So let me read this to you. A camp cook prepares the daily meals, which have a similarly rigid structure. Dinner, for example, is always at 7:30 p.m., and it always features ugali, the ubiquitous Kenyan maize flour porridge dish. The kitchen is tiny and basic, 1 stove with 2 hobs. There is meat slow cooking in a battered pot when I put my head around the door. Adjacent is an equally basic dining room, which has a bedraggled poster on the wall with a quote. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with 1 step. I think perseverance is a skill that's actually not as common in the first world as compared to the third world. Whenever I mention these crazy things that you hear about these people who got, dragged out to sea by a storm and on the boat and they managed to survive on just ocean stuff, right? I guess they drink rainwater, they managed to catch fish or something for like a month and they came back. They're definitely, malnourished, but they were alive. A lot of people would have just given up when I talked to them. You talk about the guy with, I think it's 127 hours or what is it, who, had his arm stuck and he finally cut it off. It's not simply cutting it off, right? His arm was crushed by a boulder and there's no way you could lift the boulder, obviously. There's no cell phone reception, there's no way to get help. And so he didn't just cut it off because his knife is too dull to cut through the bone. He had to break the bone first and then cut it off. Makes most people sick just thinking about it, but is that called life instinct? Well, I think the reality is, many people in the first world don't have this life instinct. My friend was talking about, her boss's son who had lost his debit card. He was in college, and he was literally there starving in his apartment because he didn't know what to do. And you're like, okay, not that hard. Make some phone calls, borrow some money from your friends. There's other ways of transferring money, even if you don't have your ID, because I think he lost his whole wallet. But I think the problem is, we don't deal with life and death situations often in the US. And I was thinking about this when I was in Vietnam. So you think about the idea of rejection and how we don't like being rejected, and that's why we justify why, people who work at these call centers, the ones that are, calling you to sell you stuff, right? They get paid a lot of money. They get paid more than minimum wage because it's such a horrible job. Nobody wants to take it for minimum wage, even though it seems like it's much simpler working at a call center, right? Spamming people than working manual labor. But it's just that this idea of life and death, we're not faced with it a lot. And even now in the US, most people still aren't faced with it. There's people around the world who are literally starving. In India, there's a lot of them. They can't do anything. I know the US has a horrible social safety net, but it's better than India. But the thing is, we're not good at persevering. I think that's one thing I've learned from being in the US. You look at immigrants, they're much better at just continuing on doing it, even though we look at them, we're like, what's the point? Work smarter, not harder, right? But look at Elliot. He's boss man now, but he still attends all the morning sessions. His coach says he's never missed a session, and they worked together for almost 20 years. It didn't go to his head. He has this idea of a work ethic. That's why he made it so far. So let me tell you my own experience and see if we could maybe shed some light into how we could develop this skill during this time period. See, sometimes I feel like, you want to know what you're doing. You want to know how to achieve the goal. That's good. But if you look at this quote, right, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Maybe the key is just taking a step, not really knowing how this path unfolds later on. The path leads somewhere. You're going to get to a destination. You want to get to the destination. And this path is the way, but you don't know what it's going to take you through. And the thing is, maybe it actually doesn't matter so much. Maybe the trick is not to look so far in advance, because that'll just discourage you. So when I was in Indonesia, we were on an island. I was there riding a motorbike. I'm not very good at motorbikes, given I just ride a bicycle in the US or drive, right? Motorcycles are thought to be very dangerous, and they are very dangerous. My brother's got into multiple accidents. But I took it out into the countryside. And so my friend didn't want to come. That's fine. Sleeping in on a Saturday, that sounds very reasonable. Our flight's not until 1 p.m. Why don't I just take it out? And I always wanted to visit the villages. So I started riding out further and further. And, there was still a path there in the grass. So I just kept following it until I realized, wait a minute. I think this is a walking path, not meant for motorbikes. So I just had a normal motorbike. I mean, not like a full-size motorcycle like the ones in the US, but apparently even these little ones are pretty heavy. I realized that when I was trying to turn it around, because, you need some area to turn it around in, and I was on the sort of the side of a hill, because it's sort of like the rice terraces and the way they planted fields. And, there's not really anyone to ask for help because there's just old ladies tending the fields and they definitely don't have cell phones. I don't have cell phone reception anyways. I think there's probably no reception. And so I was trying to turn it around and I realized this is really heavy. I wish I could get help, but there's no help. And my flight leaves in 2.5 hours. This is not good. So then I move it a little bit and I try to use the motor to help me, and I smell some smoke and I realize it's just turning and turning and turning and digging the bike further into the dirt, and this is not really helping anything. I try to put some rocks there to stabilize it so I could get some traction, but I just wasn't making progress. I was sweating under the hot Indonesian sun. It was just ridiculous. But nobody knew where I was. My friend didn't know. I wasn't going to make it out there. I don't know how far I could walk, but, driving is a lot faster than walking, and I'm pretty sure it's pretty far. I just had to get that motorbike turned around and get out there. And if you were to ask me what exactly I did, what was the trick? I would tell you I don't know. It's actually a blur. I don't remember what exactly happened. but I got out of there because I had no choice. And I feel that's the thing with this situation. We don't have a choice. And when you understand what you can do and what you can't do, for example, I can't change the president, I can't change what the US is doing. What I can change is myself and what I do in this situation. And if I have a goal, like say to write a book, I could still work on that goal. This doesn't change that. So if you have a plan all mapped out already, you just need to keep on plodding right now. Slow and steady, right? Just keep on working it. And one day, you'll reach the goal, right? I think the problem is we get so distracted with this or that. We forget about things that are essential. And it's different many times for those of us who aren't so poor. You know, when you're in a poor country and people are selling stuff on the street, this is for their basic living. This is for food. They need food, otherwise they die. They literally starve to death. But for us, it's a little bit different. But this is for our basic emotional needs, our spiritual needs, to do something. Working out a goal is not the hardest thing. It's plodding on that 10,000 step journey. But look, Elliot made it. We could all make it. We just need to keep plodding along.